MJ Hansen III. Community when I was growing up was, we're living in suburban neighborhoods. I lived in Liberty, Missouri when I was really young. Then I moved to Des Moines, Iowa, and lived there till 2012, and then moved to Olathe, Kansas, and then here to Lincoln, Nebraska. So I've always lived in the Midwest, and I felt that, you know, all those places I've lived were pretty alike except for when I lived in Kansas City. And I didn't live in, you know, KC mode down in the city. I lived in the suburbs. But I felt in Kansas City you got a lot more exposure to different types of people and different things versus, you know, Des Moines and Lincoln, more isolated towns. Music-wise, one of my best friends, his real name is Glenn Holmes, but his, you know, artist name is Trey, and he did like rap music and stuff. And he taught me how to record stuff and do things. And when I moved here to go to college, he put a bootleg copy of Logic Pro on my computer and said, mess with it. And I'm like, okay. And you know, you mess with it a couple times, try and fail, and it's not very good. But then after a year or so of doing so, it just happened and it started working for me. But I wouldn't have done it if it wasn't for him pushing me in that right direction, I guess. The first things we did were collaborations. We did 2 songs together, and then I moved away, and then I just started doing stuff. And we've collaborated since then, but never really, not to the fullest extent that I would like to do. I feel like I'm an album person. I like to make albums instead of singles, just because I feel like you can fully create a better idea with more time. It's like a movie versus a TV series, I guess. You get more time with characters and things to develop. You know, it wasn't until I was in college and, you know, sometimes when you're in college, I feel like they're like, face yourself, you know, look yourself in the face. What do you got, you know, what's in you? What do you got in there? And they push you in those classes to dig a little deep and figure out, I guess, who you are and what's made up. And I mean, you're made up of your influences. No matter how hard you try to fight or push it away, you know, they're in there and they're gonna show their face, you know. And I feel like I use that a lot in my artwork, whether it's intentional or unintentional. I surround myself with my influences. So my collection room of toys or all the posters and things I put up. Because I feel like, you know, if you walk around day to day and you see those things around, it's continuously pushing those ideas in your mind subconsciously. You don't even know it. And it shows in your work, whether it's color choices or your penmanship, your line work, whatever. It'll come out when it feels it's time. But you're constantly training yourself by looking at these images and these things. And yeah, my whole life I feel like it's been that, because my dad always collected toys and had his toy room and pictures of stuff. And I've always been a book person, but not reading books. Like, I'll read certain parts. I like, you know, I like biographies and learning information. I'll read certain things, but I ain't gonna read a whole book. I'll look at all the pictures though, because that's, you know, I guess I use books more for visual information than literary information. I have always liked music, but always from a listener's point of view. Probably my biggest influence in music is I'm a huge Prince fan, and growing up, my dad listened to shitloads of Prince over and over. I mean, car rides, we go on a 3-hour car ride and be Prince the entire time. And so, you know, I got that music kind of engraved in my head, and, you know, a lot of my musical influence is a lot based from my dad and even my grandma, because my grandma was into a lot of the old soul music and gave that to my dad and then gave it to me. And, you know, but I played instruments like through school, you know, in music class, doing stuff, and it never really stuck with me all that much. I wish now my dad would have said, you know, hey, you're gonna do this, and forced me to kind of stick with something, because then I wouldn't be playing catch up right now with all the people I'm with. But it kind of just happened, like I said, with my buddy that taught me to do a couple things, and a lot of it is self-taught, and a lot of it was just, you know, doing it on your own and practicing over and over. And it was about a solid year of like me attempting to make some stuff, try to record on it. And it's funny, when you first start recording vocals, your voice takes a long time to get comfortable with your voice, especially when you're singing or fluctuating and doing, you know, things of the expressive vocals like that. You're definitely in a vulnerable state, and it's something, you know, you record when nobody else is home because you're like, I don't want nobody to hear that nasty take or whatever you're doing. But it definitely, more time I spent with it and I got a lot more comfortable with it. And but that transition was, I don't know, it's hard to describe it because it just kind of happened. It wasn't something I planned to do. It was a mess around. I just started doing it, and then before I knew it, I, you know, started learning things. And pretty much after I did my first album, I had the goal that I want to work with live instruments and real players and musicians. And so I kind of, you know, put that out there and started searching. And it took about 2.5 years till now to get all the people I needed lined up in the right way, have all the equipment I want, the space that I want, and be as musically caught up to my peers as I can be to make things work and mesh. But it took, you know, 5 years of doing it since before I started college. So that I've only done music like that for 5 years. So I was just a listener until about 2017. And then after that, you know, when you start doing things, you get different perspectives in music. And I listen to music differently now than I did back then. And I'd say, and with that, as you're, you know, learning music and doing music, you are opening your horizons to different types of music. And I listen to a lot more different things now than I did 5 years ago. And it's, you know, in part of meeting people with different musical tastes, trying different musical things myself, and, you know, just taking that leap of faith when you're in a record store and you see a cool cover, you're like, oh, that might be fucking sweet, so I'm gonna buy that. And then you pop it on the record player and you're like, what is this, you know? And then you can't find it on Spotify because it's a record from 19 whatever, you know, and the record company is not around anymore, so it doesn't exist. It's that weird bit of exclusivity, and a lot of the times you find that with jazz. I have a lot of jazz records that I can't find anywhere else. They only exist on that physical format, which is a strange way to think about music as a physical object.
That's what I grew up with.
Yeah,
so
yeah.
It's strange for me to...
You had to go somewhere to listen to music. Otherwise, you were stuck with, you know, the radio. You had to go out and buy it. You couldn't just Google it. You couldn't just have, you know, pull out your phone and have every single thing in music that's ever been made in the last 70 years right here. And I mean, that helps with, you know, music exposure too. You know, you think back in the day, if you wanted to listen to other types of music, you had to find it, or you had to find that weird radio station and look around. Now, you can pull up anything from any time immediately and listen to it. So you're able to influence yourself a lot faster in a lot more different ways. I started with producing and doing vocals. I've been learning bass for about 6-7 months now, and I play the keys. You know, you can bang around on a keyboard and make stuff sound good, but still not know what the hell you're doing. So I feel like that's a lot of what I've been working on recently, is trying to learn that theory and get those notes down. Because then, you know, once you understand it musically like that, then it becomes a muscle memory of your, but it's not just a muscle memory based on shapes and hand formations. It's, you're connecting it with knowledge and linked knowledge, and that's the theory in it. But that takes a long time to develop. It's the same thing as, you know, me doing art since I'm a little kid with my dad. Well, it didn't come overnight. It took a whole decade of doing stuff and growing up. And, you know, if I'd have been in music as a young kid, there's that decade of time devoted to that. So it's like, it's, you know, take years and years and years to get to that point. But it's what you have to do if you want to play like that and know that theory. And even in the producing, like I said, I started with producing, and I started a lot simpler than I am now, to the point of, like, you know, you're using loops when you first start out, and, you know, you're doing things real basically. But now I'm to the point where either it's a live instrument that's being played, or it's something that I played myself. You know, like I produced the drums, or I programmed them, or did them that way, and everything else, keys, bass, I can do. Or I have somebody in my band do parts. So it's interesting to listen to stuff from 5 years ago and listen to stuff now, because if you would have told me, you know, in 2018, hey, you're gonna make this super funky jazz song and have all these live instruments and playing, I'd have been like, what are you talking about? Like, wouldn't have thought that was in my capabilities to do at that time. But it is crazy to see in 5 years how much progress you can make. I got into music primarily from my dad. I grew up just listening to a lot of different things, mostly, you know, the stuff that he was into. My grandma is really into music too, and she kind of shared her music taste to my dad and then to me. But Prince specifically I got into from my dad, my uncle, some of my cousins. There's a lot of major Prince fans in my family. And it all kind of spouted from my dad though, getting them into it. So growing up, I grew up listening to a lot of Prince, and it just kind of turned into that thing where I just really liked it. And then when I got into high school, you know, I already had that collective nature in me. And all it took was getting a couple vinyls, which when I started collecting vinyl, it was only Prince. That's all I had. And that was kind of my excuse. I'll just buy Prince. And then I was like, well, I'll buy Prince-related people. Like, you know, he did these songs and these proteges. And then I was like, well, Prince is inspired by these other people. Let me buy these records too. And then it got to the point where it was like, oh, I like this guy and he has nothing to do with Prince, so I'm just gonna buy that too. And then it just grew into thousands of records. And it's like, okay, I guess I'm collecting all types of vinyl now. I admire him a lot just because of his work ethic. You know, you're talking about a guy that did primarily everything by himself. And if he would have had a doppelganger, he wouldn't have used anybody else. He'd have played by himself and played every instrument just like he did when he started. And you know, this is the type of guy that, you know, would work all day, go to, you know, bands he was helping out, their rehearsals and jam, then go to his own rehearsal with his own band and jam, and then go to the studio and record for a couple more hours, get 2-3 hours of sleep, and then repeat it all over again. So that work ethic of just being able to create and create and create without ever really running out of fuel in 30-something years is pretty remarkable. There's not very many artists that can reinvent themselves and keep their material fresh, you know, beyond just the music. You know, when he would do a new album, his look would change, his style of music would change, you know, the instruments he was playing, the people that were in his bands. He had that kind of constant evolution of, you can't keep up with what I'm doing because you don't know what I'm doing. I'm staying, you know, ahead of the game. So that's something I've always kind of pulled into my own, you know, art or music, is that idea of reinvention and making sure that, you know, you're doing something new. And doing something new, I guess, doesn't mean too that you've abandoned everything you've already done. You can still be building on that. It's all the same body of work because you've created it, but you can always introduce new ideas and materials and things like that to evolve the work into something brand new without losing that little bit that makes it, you know, uniquely you, or, you know, his work was uniquely Prince. Like, you hear that high falsetto and you're like, yeah, that's Prince. But it might be a completely different track than what you would suspect from Prince. But that little bit of Princeness in there is what would keep it all kind of loosely connected in his discography, I guess. I know my favorite Prince song is Crystal Ball, which was actually a song recorded in '86 that didn't come out until '98, long time later. Favorite album? That's a tough one because I don't want to be basic and pick something from the '80s. I'll say this, when I really got, like, I liked Prince for a long time, but I really didn't get into collecting and really liking him until 2014 when Artificial Age came out. And that's that poster with his third eye glasses, and those are real glasses that he would wear to events and stuff, and it was really neat. And he died 2 years later, so it was one of those things where I got to experience, you know, being a fan, seeing things on TV, you know, albums coming out, but as quickly as that came, it just ended like that, you know. And I never got to see him live, which is kind of a shame, whereas my dad saw him like 5 or 6 times, I think. But at least I got that. I got those couple years of, like, wow, being able to be a fan like that, collecting, and have him still be alive and doing things that were interesting. So I think from that, my favorite era of his was right at the end when he had his big afro and his third eye glasses. But music-wise, man, that's just a tough one. It's tough to put one album on it. It's probably somewhere between Parade or I feel like Crystal Ball is not a fair album to say because that's a compilation album of vault material. So it was a triple album of songs from like the last 20 years. So it has a wide variety of stuff, a lot of good songs, but it's not a traditional album, so to speak. It's a compilation of material. But yeah, I'd have to say that. Growing up, I was interested in mainly, like my dad made toys for a living, and so I grew up in an atmosphere where toys and comic books and things of that nature were just readily acceptable or around for you to find. And my dad influenced a lot of the things I was into. And growing up, I went through a lot of different types of toys, but I never realized this until later reflection that, we had toys, but then when we wanted something new, he would recycle our toys and take them, sell them, get money for them, and buy what we were into next. And, my dad making toys for a living, he made sure we took care of our toys so that when we were done with them, he could sell them, make the money, and just kind of keep that endless cycle of stuff. So, we were pretty broke, but I always felt like I didn't feel broke because we always had new stuff. Well, little did I know what he was doing in the background to do that, because you wonder, I'm like, oh, well, where'd all those toys go? Where did, whatever go? And it's like, well, he'd tell us, you sold it, and that's what we got for that. And he was also good about, we made art a lot as kids, and he helped us make stuff, sell it, so we could make our own money. And I remember being 12 years old, and my brother was 10, and we had a couple grand in the bank that we shared. And whenever we wanted something like a PlayStation or a TV, he'd just take it out of that cash. So it taught us money management at a really young age. And, that you had to work for the stuff you wanted. But he kind of provided those opportunities for us. And it helped a lot later in life, I think, with being able to, have an idea, know how to execute it, and execute it into a profit. But it was neat to see those things, because that's what my dad did for a living. Probably my favorite toy, there's two toy lines that I'd say influenced me a lot. And the first one would be my dad's toys. And he makes toys for a living, and his character is called the Kabuto Mushi. Well, the Kabuto Mushi is one figure in a huge line of toys called the Glio system. And they're, those interlocking pin system for those toys. Well, his friend that started that, Matt DOUGHTY of Onell Design, he influenced a lot of my line work, my color choices, how I draw is heavily influenced by his style of doing things. And that's just, a family friend that I knew growing up as a little kid. But, you play with their toys and you look at their drawings growing up, and, it just rubs off on you. You don't realize it. And even my dad's own style. My dad draws a lot differently than I do, but you can put two of our drawings side by side and be like, okay, there's that element you picked up. There's that element. So I'd say first that those toys, because those toys are kind of a family legacy to me. It's the one toy that if I went completely broke, I could never sell it, because it's part of me in that way. The other toy line would probably be Masters of the Universe, He-Man. And just because when I grew up, there was a show when I was a kid that came out in like 2002 and went to like 2005 or 4. And I had all the toys for that. And my dad knew the guys that sculpted the toys. And so he would get all those toys for me. And I remember going to San Diego Comic-Con as a little kid and sitting on the table with the 4 Horsemen, which were the guys that sculpted them, and getting a signed Keldor figure by all of them. There are other grown men collectors like, oh no, they didn't get one, and here's a 6-year-old kid that's getting it. And of course I'm ripping into the packaging and taking it out, and these guys are just freaking out because it's a, super rare figure or whatever. But He-Man has always kind of inspired me that way, just because of the color choices, the bright color palette, and then the uniqueness of the characters. It's kind of a world where anything exists. You got robots, skeletons, barbarians, space stuff, pirates, ninjas, you know, everything. And I mean, that's basically how that toy line was. Oh, give me a crab guy. Oh, give me an elephant guy. I want a robot. Give me a ninja. You know, so you can have anything and everything goes in He-Man. And it's kind of just that open world of craziness and character creation. And I feel like that's a big part of my work now is that character creation. Probably my favorite He-Man character is Hordak, which I don't know if you can see him, but he's that devil guy up there on the bottom-ish shelf, the second. And I always liked him because he was just badass. Like, he just looked way cooler. And, you know, in the general lineup of things in He-Man, it's always He-Man and Skeletor. And He-Man always beats Skeletor's ass over and over and over. That's the epitome of the show. And they never really got to do too much of Hordak in the He-Man Filmation line until they introduced She-Ra. And even then, you never really got to see He-Man and Hordak fight like that. But in the show that I grew up on, they go from Skeletor to then the Snake Men, which they beat Skeletor's ass. So you're like, oh wow, these guys are even better. And then you learn that Hordak then defeats the Snake Men, so then that puts him at the top tier of like baddest of bad guys. So that I always liked him because I'm like, well, this is, you know, this is the guy to be fearful of because he can defeat everybody that's below him, I guess. But yeah, just that and then him looking super duper cool. I guess I started doing artwork at a really young age because my dad was an elementary art teacher. And he taught in North Kansas City for 7 years. And then when I was born and my brother was born, he became a stay-at-home dad and started making toys and sculpting and prototyping action figures and turned it into a business. So as a little kid, you know, I was kind of pushed to do artistic things. And, you know, when I was bored, it was, here's a sketchbook, here's a piece of paper, here's, you know, you want to do paper mache, you want to do all these different things. And so we just grew up doing a lot of different creative activities. And I think later in life, you know, I always had that creative sense or that ability to try new things and want to create something new. And it's, you know, that feeling is the same in music and in art. So when I got into music, it was that same energy and that same, you know, experimental nature that I had already in my art world that then once I got into music made that transition easy because I already knew how to be creative. It's just doing it in a new medium, so to speak. And medium-wise, as I was a kid, I did a lot of drawing, a lot of painting. I still do both of those things a lot. I did a lot of sculpting when I was young too because my dad sculpted toys. So he would help us sculpt our figures, prototype them, mold them, cast them, and sell them. And a lot of our early, when we were kids, we sold a lot of artwork to his customers that would support us and buy stuff. So it was kind of a strange accomplishment of being, you know, 10, 12 years old and selling artwork and being in art shows, you know, internationally. You know, even we had shows in different countries and stuff just with art that our dad had helped us make. So it was kind of a weird thing then going to college and having all this, you know, so-called experience, you know, under your belt, but then seeing all these different kind of worlds open up to you. Now I'd say I work a lot in just painting. That's probably my main medium, but I collaborate a lot with other artists and other mediums. So I have a friend that does collage, so we'll do collages and stuff together. I have a friend that does photography and photos, and so we did this project where I had an album cover for actually my album, The Contemplation Station, and it's this big green worm, and I had taken the shot myself in a little tiny light box, and I wanted more photos like that, but you only had so much room. So I got, you know, a big setup, white backdrop, and we created this environment for this worm. And I sat down, this is what's interesting, I sat down and I drew out the frames. I drew out the photos of what I wanted to see. I'm like, I want a photo that looks like this. I want a photo that looks like that. And when we did it, you know, he was behind the camera and he was shooting it, but I was there posing it and so-called playing, you know, with the toy and getting it to be what I wanted it to look like and setting the stage. So it's kind of neat to do photography where, you know, I'm the subject, I'm in it, and somebody's capturing me, you know, as we're walking around or we're doing whatever or playing, versus working with the photographer and saying, well, this is the idea I have in my head. I drew it out on a piece of paper. Now I'm going to physically pose it and, you know, prop the photo, you know, and make it like that. So it's nice to collaborate with other artists that are, you know, in mediums that are outside of my own, because I would never be, I guess, a photographer like that, just because it's not my forte. But working with somebody like that, it kind of allows you the best of both worlds, to be able to work with those materials, but you don't have to like own them as your own and say, oh, I'm a photographer. I'm not a photographer. I'm collaborating with a photographer doing artwork, you know, to get images out of my head. So it's interesting to do that. And a lot of the stuff I've been doing recently has been collaborative graffiti artwork down at Gotham Bar here in Lincoln that is opening up soon. And working with Lacey Skate, which is another artist that does graffiti work, and we've been doing that down there. And it's interesting when you're working in a collaborative environment like that, because you know, there's no planning. You're graffitiing, you're just doing it as it happens. So you're having to play off other people immediately and in real time. And it almost gets into a sort of like unspoken competition where you're like, you do, you know, you do that, you're like, oh, that's fucking cool. And then you do this, or you're like, oh, that's even sweet. And you're kind of like trying to one off and top the next person. But it's fun because all the stuff looks good together. And you know, even then you're adding on top of their drawings and they're painting over your shit. And you're just kind of going back and forth. And I did that work in that bar and I really liked it. And so the work I'm working on now is an extension of that, because we're having this first Friday at that bar, and it's like, you know, people are going to go in there and see that work, but you can't take it home. It's not for sale. It's in the walls. It's an installation. It's meant to live and breathe in that space, and when that space is dead, it'll die too. It'll be gone. And so it's one of those things where people are going to want to take it home. So I've been trying to create work that looks like I went up to the wall and went and popped it out of the wall, you know? So that's what I've been trying to do now, is create that new body of work, which still, you know, exists in the stuff I've done. It's the same theme, but it's just taking the materials and using them differently than I have before. And I think that kind of speaks to the pop surrealism that I do. That's what I guess I would call my genre of work that I do now. I've always wanted to do screen printing and I've always loved printmaking just because of the reproducibility of it. Be able to create one thing and then produce it and make it different every time. And I think I got that liking of that nature of working from my dad, because how my dad makes toys is, you know, you sculpt a figure. And well, you mold the figure and you cast it in plastic and you do it over and over and over and over again in different colors, painted up different, you know, clear, glow in the dark, glitter, whatever you want. And so, you know, when you're making toys like that, you got to think, how can you design something so, you know, in a way that the same person is going to buy the figure over and over and over and over again, you know? Because then you look at, like, you know, other companies. Well, how does Star Wars sell a Luke Skywalker figure a million times? Well, it's Luke Skywalker in Dagobah outfit and Luke Skywalker in Hoth uniform. And it's, you know, doing things like that. And I think Glyos, their toy lines, push that further by you being able to rearrange and build the figure and do stuff like that. But I think I got that, you know, reproduction of artwork like that ingrained in me. And that's why I like that printmaking. So I can make a print it, color it different ways, and, you know, it's only still one print. And I think the way, you know, that I've been doing my printmaking is slightly different than I'd say what you do in a traditional sense, is because, you know, a traditional sense, you can print it once, you know, and that's the print, that's the artwork, it's done. You can do layered prints where you're making separate blocks or screens or however you're doing it and doing like that. But I do mine in a way where I'm leaving my line work. I'm carving everything out but my lines, so that when I print it, it's like you're printing a coloring page for you to color in, and then making it different every time with watercolor, you know, printing on watercolor paper and stuff. But specifically, I'd like to get into screen printing, just because it's I feel like it's the high value of printmaking. Like, that's what you do if you're an elitist printmaker, is screen printing. And a lot of them guys that do that screen printing don't even do the screen printing themselves. You know, they run shops and things. But it'd be interesting to play with that. And I have a friend that just got a job at a screen printing place, and I actually bought everything to do screen print. I have all the materials: emulsion, 10 screens, the, you know, machine that you pull it down and spin it, all the inks, I got puff print, everything, but I just haven't done it. It's just sitting there. And the only thing I'm nervous about is the emulsion. That's what I don't know how to do. And so I told him, like, you learn how to do that emulsion, then you come over and tell me how to do it, and we'll get some artwork going. But so I'll probably do that eventually here soon. But yeah.
Swim in the deep end, oh baby, just stick your toes in. It's fine to test the water, sink or swim. If you drown, it don't matter. The lagoon's overflowing, it bubbles like it's boiling. You better take us off the heat, or we might just burn this joint to the ground. Party into the groove with a brand new sexy sound, handcrafted just for you. You better